The
Mercy!
fiery
Please
death
have
of
mercy!
Savonarola, the monk who defied the Pope and endured brutal
We
execution
are
Florence in the
innocent!
late 15th century, was a city of contrasts. Its streets shimmered with the gold of merchants, wealth, and the glow of magnificent artworks, yet beneath the beauty lay a world of greed, corruption, and moral decay. The people of Florence were proud of their city, their artists, and their scholars, but they also lived with fear and injustice. For many, power and wealth dictated life, and the common citizens struggled to be heard. Into this city came a man who would change everything, or at least try. Giovanni Savonarola was not born into privilege, nor did he possess wealth or powerful connections. He was a monk, devoted to his faith, with a sharp mind and a heart full of purpose. Yet it was his words that made him extraordinary. Wherever he spoke, people listened. His voice carried through churches, squares, and streets, reaching the ears of merchants, nobles, and common folk alike. Savonarola's early life had been simple, devoted to study and prayer. He was deeply committed to understanding the human soul, the nature of God, and the struggles of mankind. As he studied, he saw the corruption around him, not just in Florence but throughout Italy. Church leaders who preached humility lived in luxury. Wealthy citizens flaunted their riches without concern for the poor, and the Medici family, rulers of Florence, were often more interested in power than in justice. Savonarola could not remain silent. He believed that humans, despite their weaknesses, could rise above greed, pride, and fear. He believed that one person, armed with truth and courage, could inspire others to seek justice. His first sermons were small, simple gatherings in modest churches. He spoke of honesty, virtue, and responsibility. People were drawn to him, first out of curiosity, then out of admiration. Savonarola had a way of speaking that made each listener feel as though he was speaking directly to them. He did not just lecture, he connected. He challenged people to look within themselves and to act in the name of goodness. As his following grew, Savonarola became bolder. He began addressing the corruption of Florence's leaders openly. He spoke of the Medici family's obsession with wealth, the moral decay of the clergy, and the dangers of pride. His words were sharp, but they were not cruel. He did not seek revenge, he sought reform. At first the leaders laughed at him. What could a single monk do against centuries of power and tradition? Yet the people listened. Citizens began to gather in the streets, hanging on his every word. Merchants, artisans, and even some nobles found themselves inspired by his call for honesty and virtue. Florence was captivated by his courage. The city began to change. Citizens started to question their leaders. They began to see the effects of corruption on their lives and the lives of others. Small acts of reform appeared. People donated to the poor, helped their neighbors, and practiced honesty in their businesses. The influence of Savonarola's words was growing, and with it, the fear of those in power. It was not long before the Medici rulers noticed the monk's power. They were not used to people speaking against them openly, let alone gathering large crowds to do so. They tried to ignore him at first, believing the people would soon return to their old ways. But Savonarola's presence in the city was undeniable. One day, he delivered a sermon that would mark the beginning of a new era in Florence. Standing on the steps of a grand church, he spoke with passion. Your wealth is not a gift from God if it leads you to pride. Your power is not a blessing if it brings harm to your neighbor. Each of you must examine your heart and choose the path of justice, honesty, and faith. Florence can rise, not through riches but through virtue. The crowd erupted in applause. Citizens left the square determined to live differently, to act with honor, and to support one another. Word of the sermon spread throughout the city and beyond. Florence was beginning to listen. Savonarola's fame grew quickly. He traveled throughout the city, speaking in different squares, gathering followers wherever he went. His message was always the same. Humans are capable of greatness, but only if they reject corruption embrace virtue, and stand together. Even those who disagreed with him could not ignore his courage. Savonarola's unwavering commitment to truth and justice earned him respect, even from some who felt threatened by his words. People whispered that he was different from others, a human who would not bow to fear or power. Yet, the monk knew that his mission would not be easy. The more powerful the city became, the more they sought to control or silence him. Savonarola understood that speaking the truth often came with danger, but he was prepared. He believed that the human spirit, guided by principle, could withstand any challenge. The first major test came when he challenged Florence's leaders to stop participating in the extravagances of the city's wealthy elite. He called for citizens to reject the ostentatious displays of wealth, for they encouraged greed and moral decay. To make his point, he organized the Bonfire of the Vanities, a public gathering where citizens voluntarily destroyed objects of pride, rich clothes, gambling tables, and other symbols of corruption. The act shocked the city. Many were inspired, some were angered. Yet the courage of Savonarola was undeniable. He stood calmly, watching as the people followed his call, showing that humanity could rise above greed when guided by conviction. Even as opposition grew, Savonarola's resolve never wavered. He understood that true leadership did not come from fear or force, but from moral authority and the ability to inspire others. Each sermon, each act of courage, strengthened the idea that one human being could make a difference, even in the face of powerful opposition. Citizens of Florence began to see themselves differently. They were no longer passive observers of corruption, they were participants in reform. The city began to feel alive with hope, a sense of unity, and a shared purpose. And at the center of it all was a monk who refused to yield, who believed in the power of human virtue and the strength of the human spirit. Savonarola's rise was not just a story of one man. It was the story of humanity at its best, courageous, principled, and capable of change. In a city that had long been ruled by wealth and power, he reminded people that humans could choose morality, justice, and virtue. And as the citizens of Florence followed his example, they learned a lesson that would echo through history. When humans act with courage and conviction, no power can easily silence them. The streets of Florence had changed. Where once wealth and decadence dominated, a new energy now stirred, a sense that ordinary citizens could stand for something greater than mere comfort or riches. Savonarola's sermons had sparked hope and inspired action, yet they also sowed fear among those whose power depended on the city's indulgence. For the ruling Medici family, Savonarola had become a problem that could no longer be ignored. They were men used to controlling Florence with wealth, influence, and carefully placed threats. Now, a single monk dared to challenge them openly. At first, the Medici tried subtle intimidation. Advisors would whisper warnings, suggest bribes, or encourage false accusations. But Savonarola remained unshaken. He had studied human nature, and he understood the ways of manipulation. His mind was sharp, and his heart steadfast. One morning, as sunlight spilled over the city's red rooftops, Savonarola addressed a crowd in Piazza della Signoria. Hundreds had gathered, some curious, others eager for guidance. His voice rose with purpose. Do not fear those who seek to control you with gold or with lies. Fear not the men who command armies or who sit in palaces. True power lies in the human heart, in the courage to choose virtue over greed, justice over comfort, truth over falsehood. The crowd erupted in applause and word spread quickly. Messages carried from street to street, calling people to gather, to act, to remember that Florence could be more than a city of wealth. It could be a city of integrity. The Medici's frustration grew. They convened in secret, plotting ways to undermine the monk's influence. Yet every plan they devised seemed to fail. Savonarola anticipated the moves of men who relied solely on cunning and intimidation. He understood that human spirit could not be subdued by threats alone. Meanwhile, Savonarola was not idle. He traveled through Florence, visiting churches, marketplaces, and homes. He listened to citizens' concerns, offering guidance and quietly shaping a movement that was rooted not in rebellion, but in principle. It was during one of these visits that he encountered a group of young merchants. They confessed their fears. They were torn between loyalty to their families, who supported the Medici, and the stirring truth they felt in Savonarola's words. He listened patiently, then spoke. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting rightly despite fear. You may feel the weight of opposition, but remember, your choices shape the city, the people, and even the generations to come. Choose wisely. The merchants left inspired, determined to act with integrity in their business and lives. Slowly, the influence of Savonarola spread, not just through sermons but through the choices of ordinary citizens. Yet, power does not yield easily. Pope Alexander VI, known for his ambition and cunning, had taken notice of the monk. Reports reached the Vatican of Savonarola's growing following and his criticisms of the Church. The Pope viewed him as a dangerous voice of dissent, capable of inspiring disobedience and instability. Florence, however, was no longer under the absolute control of the wealthy elite. Citizens had tasted the feeling of unity and moral purpose. Even when threatened, they remembered Savonarola's words and the hope he had brought. They began to protect him, creating a network of allies who were ready to stand against corruption. Tensions escalated further when Savonarola called for the bonfire of the vanities. The plan was controversial, even among his supporters. Citizens were asked to surrender items of pride, luxuries that symbolized greed, vanity, and moral weakness. At first, some hesitated. Could the human spirit truly reject comfort and beauty? Could they truly rise above societal expectations? Savonarola addressed the crowd with calm authority. Your strength is not in gold or silk, but in your choice to act with honor. Destroy these objects not out of shame, but out of commitment to a greater purpose. Show Florence that humans are capable of self-control, courage, and virtue. On the day of the bonfire, thousands gathered. Items of beauty and wealth were laid upon towering pyres, and flames consumed them. Citizens watched, not with sorrow, but with a sense of liberation. The act was symbolic, yet deeply powerful. It was humanity demonstrating that it could rise above desire for comfort and power, that moral action was more important than possessions. Not everyone supported Savonarola. Some merchants complained about the destruction of goods, nobles whispered in palaces, and church officials feared the growing independence of the people. Yet the monk's calm courage, his unwavering faith, and his ability to inspire others created a force that could not easily be extinguished. In private, Savonarola reflected on the challenges ahead. He understood that power, when threatened, often strikes with force. He wrote letters, spoke with allies, and studied the strategies of leaders both past and present. His goal was not to overthrow rulers by violence, but to awaken the human conscience, to show that moral courage could outlast fear. The Pope's threats became more direct. Envoys arrived in Florence, demanding that Savonarola cease his sermons and submit to church authority. Citizens, emboldened by the monk's teachings, resisted. They rallied behind him, showing that humans could unite against oppression when guided by principle and justice. Savonarola, however, did not respond with anger or vengeance. He believed in reason and in the enduring power of truth. Each response was measured, each action calculated to protect the people while advancing the message of virtue. He wrote letters to the Vatican, appealing to conscience, not fear, emphasizing that humanity's purpose was to act with integrity, even in the face of immense pressure. As days turned to weeks, Florence became a city divided. The Medici sought to reclaim control, Pope Alexander VI pressed for compliance, and yet the citizens continued to follow the monk. Tensions simmered, and whispers of rebellion filled the streets. Yet Savonarola remained calm, knowing that the true battle was not for power or wealth, but for the hearts and minds of the people. He continued to travel, preaching to anyone who would listen. Artisans, scholars, and young students were among his most devoted followers. They learned not only to speak truth, but to act upon it. They organized themselves to help the poor, to educate children, and to maintain justice in their communities. Florence was changing, and it was humanity, the courage, intelligence, and integrity of ordinary citizens, that was driving the transformation. Despite the growing opposition, Savonarola found strength in the human spirit. He witnessed the bravery of citizens who refused to bow to corruption, the creativity of individuals who found solutions to seemingly impossible problems, and the determination of families who chose virtue over comfort. It was a living proof that humans, even in difficult circumstances, could rise above fear and greed. Yet, Savonarola knew the road ahead would be harder. The Vatican was patient, and the Medici were cunning. They would not easily surrender their influence. He prepared the citizens for the challenges to come, emphasizing resilience, moral courage, and the power of unity. The story of Florence during these months became one of remarkable human achievement. A single monk, armed with words and unwavering principle, had inspired thousands to act with courage, to question injustice, and to choose virtue. Even when surrounded by powerful enemies, he showed that the human spirit could resist oppression. As night fell over the city, Savonarola stood atop the steps of a church, looking down at the quiet streets. He reflected on the journey so far, the victories, the challenges, and the courage of those who had joined him. He knew the struggle was far from over, but he also knew that the people of Florence had discovered a powerful truth. Humans, united by principle and bravery, could achieve what once seemed impossible. The city of Florence, once vibrant with hope and reform, now hummed with tension. Savonarola had become a symbol of courage and moral clarity, yet the forces against him had grown too powerful to ignore. The Medici rulers, the Pope, and rival clergy were determined to silence him. Their patience had worn thin. It began quietly at first. Friends and followers noticed unusual movements in the streets. Soldiers appeared where there had been none. Church officials sent messages demanding compliance. The people whispered warnings, but Savonarola remained calm. He had always known that standing for truth could come with danger. His courage was rooted not in pride, but in principle. One morning, the silence of his quarters was broken by a knock at the door. Two men in uniforms, faces stern and unyielding, entered. Without explanation, they demanded that Savonarola accompany them to the city's authorities. Calmly, he dressed and followed, speaking only a few words to his aides. "Do not fear. Humanity is stronger than fear, and truth cannot be imprisoned." The trial took place in a grand hall, filled with officials, nobles, and clergy. The air was thick with tension. Savonarola was brought before judges who had already decided his fate. They expected fear, anger, perhaps submission. Instead, they found a man of unwavering composure. Savonarola stood tall, his eyes steady, his voice calm but resolute. "I am here to speak truth," he said. "I have not sought power, nor wealth, nor fame. I have sought only to guide Florence and her people toward virtue and justice." The courtroom murmured. Some were inspired, others scowled. The officials attempted to intimidate him, asking pointed questions, casting doubt on his actions, and warning of dire consequences. But Savonarola answered each question with logic and courage, demonstrating a keen understanding of human nature and moral principle. "You speak of fear and rebellion," one official said sharply, "yet you have stirred the people against the church and the rulers. Are you not guilty of sedition?" Savonarola met the gaze calmly. I have not incited violence. I have called for conscience. I have reminded people of their human responsibility. Is it a crime to inspire virtue?" Even as he spoke, the people of Florence gathered outside the courtroom. Their presence was silent but powerful. They carried candles, prayers, and letters of support. They had witnessed the changes in their own lives and communities, and they knew that this monk, this human being, had shown them courage, wisdom, and the power of moral action. Inside, the trial continued. Officials presented accusations, evidence, and witnesses who sought to discredit him. Savonarola listened patiently, never raising his voice in anger. His responses were calm, reasoned, and filled with the clarity of principle. He acknowledged human weakness, yet emphasized that choice, courage, and integrity define true humanity. "Do you not see," he said quietly but firmly, "that fear alone does not command loyalty? That force cannot create virtue. Humanity's strength lies in conscience, in courage, and in the determination to act rightly, even when the world demands otherwise." The courtroom was silent. His words carried not just authority but inspiration. Even those who wished him harm could not deny the weight of his convictions. Outside, the citizens of Florence held a vigil. They whispered to one another, recounting acts of kindness, bravery, and reform inspired by Savonarola. His influence had reached far beyond sermons and speeches. It had transformed communities, inspired families, and awakened a sense of responsibility and courage in countless individuals. Yet the powers against him were relentless. The Pope demanded obedience, the Medici sought control, rival clergy pressed for punishment. Savonarola understood that his capture might be inevitable, but he refused to waver. To him, the human spirit, when guided by truth and courage, could not be destroyed. Even if his body were imprisoned, his ideas and influence would endure. The trial dragged on for days. Savonarola answered each accusation with logic and moral clarity. He spoke not only for himself, but for the citizens who had trusted him, the ordinary humans who had risen above fear and greed, and the generations who might one day remember that courage and principle matter more than wealth or power. Despite the mounting pressure, some officials began to waver. They saw the strength of the people outside, the courage in Savonarola's eyes, and the power of his words. They realized that punishing him would not simply silence one man. It could inflame the conscience of the city, inspire resistance, and make a martyr of him. Savonarola, however, did not seek martyrdom. He sought change. He sought to awaken humanity to its own strength, courage, and moral responsibility. Even in the face of inevitable judgment, he focused not on fear or anger, but on teaching and inspiring. When the verdict was finally delivered, Savonarola remained calm. He was sentenced to imprisonment, a clear signal that the authorities intended to break his influence. But as he was led away, he turned to the people, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Do not despair," he said. "Courage is not measured by the absence of danger, but by the willingness to stand for truth. Humanity is stronger than fear, stronger than oppression, and stronger than chains. Remember this, and Florence will endure in virtue." The days in confinement were difficult. Guards watched him constantly, and the threat of harsher punishment loomed. Yet even in isolation, Savonarola maintained his calm. He prayed, reflected, and wrote letters to allies. Each word was measured, filled with encouragement, and guided by the belief that humans could withstand oppression when anchored in principle. Word of his trial and imprisonment spread throughout Florence and beyond. Citizens continued to gather, demonstrating solidarity and courage. They understood that even in captivity, Savonarola's influence endured. His teachings were no longer confined to speeches. They had become part of the very fabric of the city, inspiring acts of integrity, bravery, and unity. The human spirit, he knew, could not be imprisoned. Courage, conscience, and the will to act rightly were gifts that no one could take away. And as Florence rallied, he understood that the struggle was not about one man, it was about humanity itself. Savonarola's trial became a turning point. It was a demonstration of the enduring power of human principle, of moral courage, and of unity in the face of overwhelming opposition. Even as the city's rulers and the Pope sought to break him, he inspired Florence to rise above fear, greed, and submission. The monk's unwavering strength reminded the people that humans, when guided by virtue, could endure any trial. Even in confinement, he was a teacher, a leader, and a symbol of what humans could achieve when they chose courage over cowardice, truth over deception, and integrity over compromise. Florence was quiet that morning, yet beneath the calm lay a city tense with anticipation. Word had spread quickly. Savonarola, the monk who had stirred hearts and minds, would face execution. Citizens gathered in the streets, some weeping, some praying, others simply standing silently in solidarity. Even those who had disagreed with him could not ignore the courage he had shown, the integrity he had lived, and the inspiration he had brought to Florence. Savonarola's cell was cold, austere, and silent. Guards patrolled relentlessly, yet the monk remained calm. He spent the morning in prayer, reflecting not on fear, but on the teachings he had shared, the lives he had touched, and the future he hoped humanity would embrace. His thoughts were of Florence and the people he loved, not of himself. As the hour approached, he was led from his cell. Citizens lined the streets, some holding candles, others simply standing in silence. There was no chaos, no anger, only a profound sense of respect for the man who had shown humanity's potential for courage and integrity. On the steps of the square, Savonarola was placed before the pyre. The crowd was vast, yet hushed. He looked upon them calmly, his gaze steady. There was no fear in his eyes, only the quiet assurance that his mission was far greater than one life, that the human spirit could endure beyond fire and suffering. He raised his hands, not in anger or defiance, but in blessing and encouragement. "Remember," he said, his voice clear and calm, "that courage, truth, and integrity are the strength of humanity. Even if I fall today, these principles cannot be destroyed. They live in you in every act of kindness, every choice for justice, and every moment of bravery." The executioners approached, their expressions solemn. Savonarola did not struggle. He did not plead. He simply stood, embodying the courage he had preached. He had faced fear, oppression, and betrayal, yet he remained unbroken. As the flames rose, there was a collective shudder among the crowd. Yet it was not a shudder of terror, but of recognition, recognition that true human strength could not be measured by survival alone. It was measured by principle, by courage, and by the ability to inspire others to act rightly even when facing overwhelming odds. The fire consumed the monk's body, yet the spirit of his message endured. Citizens, inspired by his life and sacrifice, carried forward the lessons he had imparted. Children remembered his teachings, families discussed his words, and communities continued the acts of courage and integrity he had championed. In the days that followed, Florence seemed transformed. Though grief hung heavy in the streets, there was also a renewed sense of purpose. The people had witnessed what a single human could achieve with courage, intellect, and moral clarity. They understood that true leadership came not from wealth or power, but from the ability to inspire humanity to rise above its weaknesses and choose virtue. Savonarola's influence spread beyond Florence. Scholars, artists, and citizens in distant cities learned of his courage, his principles, and the way he had stirred an entire community to action. His story became a symbol of the human capacity for bravery, moral clarity, and resilience. Even generations later, his legacy endured. The fires that had taken his life could not destroy the ideals he had lived. Citizens remembered that one person, guided by principle, could inspire thousands to act with courage, to question injustice, and to choose integrity over fear. Humanity, they realized, was capable of extraordinary strength when individuals stood together in pursuit of truth. Savonarola's life became more than a tale of tragedy. It became a lesson in human potential. He showed that fear could be faced, corruption could be challenged, and moral courage could ignite a movement. His story was proof that ordinary humans, when guided by conviction and principle, could achieve extraordinary outcomes. In Florence, the echoes of his words continued to shape the city. Citizens carried forward reforms he had inspired. Churches, homes, and marketplaces reflected renewed attention to justice, compassion, and moral responsibility. Ordinary people acted with extraordinary courage, proving that the human spirit could endure even in the face of the harshest trials. History remembered Savonarola not for the fire that ended his life, but for the fire he had ignited in humanity. Scholars studied his sermons, poets wrote of his courage, and artists captured his calm determination in portraits and frescoes. He became a symbol of the potential within every human to choose integrity over fear, action over passivity, and courage over submission. The people of Florence, though mourning, understood that his death was not the end. It was a beginning, a reminder that human strength, moral courage, and resilience are never confined to a single life. They live on in the choices each person makes, in the acts of bravery and kindness that shape communities and inspire generations. Savonarola's final moments were peaceful, filled with dignity. He faced death not with despair, but with acceptance, knowing that his life had proven a timeless truth. Humanity, when guided by principle, is unstoppable. Even the strongest flames could not consume the ideals he had lived, nor could they extinguish the courage and conscience he had awakened in countless hearts. In the years that followed, Florence continued to honor his memory. Citizens told stories of the monk who had stood against power, inspired reform, and demonstrated the strength of the human spirit. Children learned of his courage, families passed on his teachings, and scholars preserved his words for posterity. Savonarola's life became a testament to the enduring power of humanity, a reminder that courage, wisdom, and moral clarity define what it means to be truly human. One man, guided by principle and faith in humanity, had changed a city, inspired countless individuals, and left a legacy that would endure long after his death. The flame that took his life could not take his spirit. Florence had learned that humans, united by courage and virtue, could achieve remarkable things. They had seen it with their own eyes, and they carried the lesson forward, that even in the darkest times, the light of human courage, moral clarity, and integrity can shine brightly and inspire generations to come.